Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to talk in our series on Indian philosophy. We are going to talk on one of the important theories of philosophy, that is a Nyaya Theory of Philosophy, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Ajay Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences. Dr. Verma is a prolific professor. His dynamism always helps students to understand various topics of philosophy in detail. Friends, if you wish to ask questions from Dr. Ajay Verma on today's topic, then do call us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1-800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1-800-110-430. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Ajay Verma, and would request him to explain us today's topic in detail. Hello, sir. Welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, Geetika. Welcome viewers. So as pointed out, in today's lecture we'll be talking about Nyaya Theory of Perception, and this is a part of a series of lectures that we have been offering from this end on Nyaya philosophy. So, in some of our previous lectures, we have already discussed the main metaphysical tenets of Nyaya philosophy, which includes several of categories that are enumerated in Nyaya Sutras. Right in the beginning, they enumerate a number of categories or padarthas, and we have already talked about all the categories in detail. And after that, now we are shifting over to their epistemology. And in some of our previous lectures, we have already discussed their definition of what should count as knowledge, namely prama, and what should count as the means, a proper means, a valid source of knowledge, which the term for that is pramana. So, as we are already aware, Nyaya philosophy only admits of 4 pramanas, beginning with the perception, which is the most important one because this is more direct than any other pramanas, though other pramanas also rely on it. So, perception is one undisputed source of knowledge, which among 9 different schools of thought, 6 of them orthodox and 3 heterodox schools, none of them disputes this contention that perception is a valid source of knowledge. So that is the first, to be considered, and the second praman that Nyayikas admit of is inference. Next to that is analogy or upaman, and the last one is verbal authority. They being an orthodox school of Indian philosophy, so this goes without saying that. They have to admit of verbal authority as one of the separate pramanas, as we are already aware. The distinction between orthodox and heterodox schools is not based on any other distinction except for the fact that orthodox philosophers believe in verbal authority of the Vedas, of the Vedic corpus, which includes not only Vedas but the literature that came later on, namely Upanishads. So now, having said that, we want to look at in this lecture at Nyaya Theory of Perception, and as probably you would remember that in our last lecture we had talked about Nyaya Theory of we talked about what kind of realism does Nyayikas adhere to, and in that context, we must remember that there could be different brands of realism, and among them is also representational realism, which basically means that being a realist theory. So realist school basically distinguishes itself from any idealist school insofar as realists would maintain that there is an independent existence of objects out there. Independent from what? Independent from our knowledge of them. So even if there is nobody aware of a particular thing existing at a particular place, even then that thing is there independently of anybody knowing it. So, but according to representational realism, as you would remember, the basic idea there is that some kind of a sense data, as if emanating from the object of knowledge, impinges upon our sense organs, and then some kind of a representational image is created in our mind. And what we have immediate access to is the representation of that object that we have access to. So this is a kind of realism which does not, so to speak, freeze itself completely from idealistic kind of tendency. So as opposed to that, Nyaya realism is an idea that our senses are in a kind of a direct contact with the object of knowledge, and so therefore there is no mediation involved here, unlike representational realism, where we believe that our perception of something is actually mediated by the representation of that object. So now, having known that, we must understand that if we were to place Nyaya philosophy, sort of between these two different kind of realisms, then Nyaya philosophers would be closer to Nyaya realism than some sort of representational realism, and of course they are thoroughgoing critics of any kind of idealism, and so they would never agree to the idea that there is we only have access to awareness and awareness of an object, and therefore since we only have access to our ideas, our consciousness. Therefore, we should not believe that there is anything apart from the consciousness. So they are thoroughgoing realist of any such kind of idea, and propounders of idealism as far as Indian philosophy is concerned are Vigyanvad and Buddhists. And also we could count here in the non-dualist philosophy propounded by Shankara. So now, having understood it, it'll make better sense for us how Naiyayikas define perception as a valid source of knowledge, and in that context, let's once again read their definition of perception as we find it in Gautama's Nyaya Sutra. So Nyaya Sutra, that is aphorism 1.1.4, defines perceptual cognition as follows: Indriyarth sannikarsho utpannam jnanam avyapadeshyam avyabhichari vyavsyatmakam pratyaksham, which basically translates into a perceptual cognition arises by means of the connection between sense faculty and object, is not dependent on words, is non-deviating, and is determinate. So here, from this definition, we could see that there are, the main reason that is cited behind perception is that it is indriyartha sannikarsha utpannam. It results from, it is produced by sannikarsha, meaning concourse between indriyarth, meaning indriya on the one hand, that is sense organs on the one hand, and arth on the other, arth meaning object of knowledge. So that's the main condition, that's the primary central condition as far as the definition of perception is concerned. So this is a kind of knowledge which is a result of utpannam from a sannikarsha, from a concourse between indriya, senses, and artha, and the object. So this is the main condition that is laid down by Nyaya philosophers for perception. But it doesn't end here. So whenever certain definitions are offered for that matter, not only pramanas, but for that matter anything, then one of the basic things to take care of is that it should neither be too wide nor should it be too narrow. So Nyayikas clearly want to point out that this is not the only condition, because this is a condition that other philosophers would also admit of. But they, from the point of view of epistemology, their epistemological tenets are widely different from the epistemological tenets of Nyaya philosophy. So therefore, this central condition is not enough. There are certain other conditions that are also laid down, namely that it should be a vyapadeshyam, meaning it should be not dependent on words, and it should be non-deviating. It shouldn't deviate. It should represent. It should point out. It should point towards its object correctly. It should point out towards the true nature of the object concerned, and then also it should be vyavasayatmakam, meaning it should be of the nature of determinate, it should be communicable, it should be expressible, therefore it should be verbal in a certain way in nature. So now, having understood what is the central condition that is laid out by Nyaya philosophers for the definition of perceptual cognition, and what are the other clauses that they have added to their definition, now what we can do is we can look at these conditions one by one and try to understand how perception as a pramana is defined in Nyaya Sutras. So now we could begin with the very first word, which is indriyarth. So here there are two things that are being referred to. One is indriya and the other is earth. So first of all, even before we talk about their sannikarsha, meaning the kind of connection between the two which is necessary for perceptual cognition, we must understand what, according to Nyayikas, is the nature of indriya, and what, according to them, should be the nature of earth. So now let's begin with the indriyas. So of course, all of us know that general belief is that there are five sense organs, and these five sense organs are constantly engaged in the sense data that we can receive from our surroundings, and it includes the sense of seeing, and the sense organ related with that is our eyes, and then is the sense of being able to smell something, and the sense organ responsible for that is nose, and then taste, and the corresponding sense organ is our tongue, and then our ears, which are sense organs which are responsible for for the perception of sound. And last but not the least is the tactual sense, the sense of touch, which is sort of defined by our ability to sense something through our skin. So these are the 5 sense organs which could be in touch with the object outside, and whenever there is an object outside, depending on the focus of manas. So now another thing that we must understand here is that for Naiyayikas, these are not the only sense organs that we have. According to them, there could be sense organs could be both internal as well as external. So these are the sense organs, these 5 sense organs that we just enumerated. These are the sense organs which are responsible, which bring us in connection, which create an ability in us to engage with the outside world. So these indriyas, these sense organs, are capable of engaging with the external objects out there, and since these objects outside of us, which exist independently, have several properties. They could have smell, they could have colors, they could have a certain kind of taste. So since they have various properties, so therefore we require different sense organs to be able to engage with those different properties. But over and apart from that, there are certain other kinds of perception which happen inside us, internally. See, for example, certain kind of feelings, certain kind of moods, volitions, having a desire to act in a particular way, pleasure, pain, and so on and so forth. These are considered also as objects of perception, and of course these objects of perception differ from other objects of perception because other objects of perception exist outside independently of us, whereas these objects of perception are in a certain way internal to our biological organism. So say, for example, pain and pleasure are some of the feelings, some of the psychological responses that exist inside of us. Liking something, disliking something, having a desire to possess something. So all these are objects which are internal to us. Nevertheless, these are felt by us, and we become aware of these objects. And since these are not outside of us, we cannot say that I see pain. We don't see somebody's pain, we see somebody in pain. Similarly, our own pain also, we don't see it. It's directly somehow available to us. Nevertheless, we know it, we are aware of it. So these feelings are also viewed by Naiyayikas as different kinds of objects of perception, for which a different kind of, since they are internal to us and not externally engaged by us, therefore there has to be a separate sense organ dedicated to the sensory mechanism involved in such cases. And this internal sense organ, which is responsible for the perception of internal objects of perception like pain, pleasure, and so on, is called manas. So manas is often defined as internal sense organ, whereas 5 different sense organs are external sense organs. So to recapitulate, for Nyaya philosophers, indriyas could be of 2 kinds. One is external sense organs, which includes 5 sense organs that we are aware of, and apart from that, there is one other sense organ which is of the nature of internal sense organ, and it is known as manas, and it is responsible for certain internal objects of perception. So this defines broadly what is meant by indriyas, sense organs, according to Nyaya Sutras. But apart from this, if we also want to understand the metaphysical nature of indriyas, sense organs, according to Nyaya philosophy, then we should understand that according to Nyaya philosophy, all indriyas are basically are sort of made of, so to speak, are composed of a particular element, a perception of a particular panch mahabhutas, basic constituents of everything that the world is made up of. So each indriya is composed of one of the panch mahabhutas, and but of course as captured, so to speak, within the framework of our biological organism. So it is like and the idea behind it is that the indriyas responsible, the sense organ responsible for a particular kind of object, particular kind of property, has to have some kind of affinity, has to be of the same nature as what it is engaging with. Otherwise, if it is other than that, then there would be no way, if there is no affinity between the nature of the object of cognition and the indriyas themselves, then there would not be, if there is no affinity involved, then the indriyas would not be in a condition to engage with the object concerned. So if we want to sort of try and understand it further, the overall idea is somewhat like this. Say, for example, if we want to sort of understand it with an analogy, we would know that if we try to mix up, say for example mustard oil with water, we know that in two being of different nature, temporarily, forcibly, we could kind of try and bring them together. But after a point of time, since their nature is very different, they would separate out, and would be, we would be able to view them as two different things. Similarly, suppose there is, there were a glass of, glass filled up partially with water and partially with mustard oil, and there were another glass, partially filled up with mustard oil and partially filled up with water. Suppose we were to pour both the things in another bigger utensil, we'll find that again the oil would have tendency to quickly mix up with oil and water with water. The two somehow would not engage with each other, would not have any kind of reaction with each other, because the two are of different nature, and they do not have the kind of affinity required for an actual kind of engagement with each other. Similarly, indriyas, in order to be able to engage with a particular property of the object concerned, will have to be of the same nature. So say for example, as far as the sense of sight is concerned, it is, it involves light, is of the nature of, tejas, is of the nature of heat or fire, and this element of tejas, this element of fire or heat is already there inside our eyes, is already there inside our sense organ responsible for sight, namely eyes, and this is why it is able to engage with a kind with the property that the sense organ is dedicated to, dedicated to the perception of that property. namely color. So this is why Indriyas have to have, according to Nyaya philosophers, will have to have the same kind of element. It has to go on into constitution of their their constitution. And it is only localized, so that element that they are responsible for the perception of, that element is localized in the sense organs of the subject of knowledge. And most important among them is the ears. The ears are supposed to already have sound, which is supposed to be the property of akash, the property of ether. And this is why, through the medium of air, the sound is transferred. And since we already have sound, which is the property of akash in our ears, therefore we are able to have access to auditory perception. And we will sort of discover more about this as we proceed to the different kinds of sense object contacts. So this is very broadly how Nyaya philosophers look at the idea of sense organs, or the idea of indriyas, in their definition of perception, in the context of perception. And now the next term is arth, which means the object of knowledge. And we must understand here that we don't want to go to into metaphysics of it, because they'll take us a little bit outside of the scope of today's lecture. But broadly defined, for the purpose of within the context of their definition of perception, we must understand that according to Nyaya philosophers, artha should be presentative in character. It should be presented to us. It should be brought into the field of any of the senses, any of the external senses, or any or for that matter within the field of the internal sense organ, which is manas. So artha, from the point of view of the pramana of perception, has to be presentative in character, has to sort of present itself, has to bring itself within the field and scope of the sense organs, and only then it becomes amenable to perceptual knowledge. So friends, we'll talk more about the definition of perception as given in Nyaya Sutras when we return after a short break. Thank you.
With this, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session. Friends, you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break, and we'll try to give you more and more of knowledge. Till then, be with us. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on Nyaya Theory of Perception, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Ajay Verma is Associate Professor and he is teaching in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Friends, if you wish to ask questions regarding today's topic from Dr. Ajay Verma, then do call us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1-800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1-800-110-430. Now I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Verma, once again. Hello sir, welcome back to the session.
Welcome back, viewers. So we were talking about Nyaya Theory of Perception, and we were looking at the definition of perception as given in Nyaya Sutras, in Gautama's Nyaya Sutras. So there we saw that the very first word, which is which we find in this definition is Indriyarth, and we were trying to look at what is the meaning of Indriyas, how are the Indriyas viewed, what is the meaning of sense organ according to Nyaya Sutras. And we saw in that context that they admit of 5 external sense organs, and apart from that 1 internal sense organ as well. And we were trying to look at what is the meaning of artha in their definition of perception, and from the point of view of their theory of perception, we learned that for them artha has to be presentative in character, has to somehow sort of be present, should present itself within the field of any of our senses. So that is one of the important required necessary character of the artha. Otherwise it wouldn't qualify as as an object of perception. And also we must understand that from this is precisely because this is how an object of perception is described, is viewed in Nyaya philosophy. And this is precisely because of this that smriti or remembrance, pratibhigya, remembrance, or smriti, the source of remembrance, is remembrance is excluded from the domain of knowledge. So smriti is not counted as knowledge per se. It could be, it could perform some auxiliary function. Say, for example, when we talk about inference, when we look at smoke somewhere, then we know that smoke is invariably associated with fire. And then how do we establish this association? How do we become sure about this association of smoke with fire? Because we can remember some of the previous instances. We remember that in past, say for example in kitchen, we have seen smoke always accompanied by fire. So memory here has an auxiliary role to play. It assists us. It has a secondary role to play, in the process of inference. But a memory, not some kind of judgment, solely based on our memory of something, is not at par, is not counted at par with knowledge prama per se, by the Nayayikas, and the reason being that it's not of the nature of artha of knowledge. It's not of the nature of an object of knowledge. It doesn't fulfill the epistemological requirement that is laid out in the definition, and therefore in the definition of perception on Nyaya Sutras, therefore it has to be excluded from the domain of knowledge. So, and apart from that, we also must understand that artha or object is not seen as something as something kind of non-partite, something handed down to us. it has it has a complex structure to itself. It has its parts which are viewed as real, according to Nyayikas, and not only that, it is an object which has properties, and properties are also in turn objects of knowledge. So, say for example, if we talk about a table, it could have different properties. Say for example, if we involve our tactual sense organs, sensations, then sort of we find that it is of a certain kind. It is solid in nature. And it could be of a particular color. So say for example, if it is it is brownish in color, so that would count as its property. But again, these and also apart from that, object would also have particularity and generality. So it will have a generic nature. Also it will have a particularity, visheshanata of some sort. So, as far as this generic nature is concerned, namely samanya, so that is another thing that is that is something that inheres. It is there in the object, because of which the object is what it is. And say for example, tableness of a table, and tableness is something that inheres inside the table, and it's not something that we infer. It is something that we are aware of directly. So therefore, an object is also supposed to have a complex nature. It is supposed to have different sort of properties inhering in it, and then these properties, say for example color and so on, in turn have their universals. So say for example, a table could be brown in color, so the brownness would be its property. And then sort of brown, the color brown in turn has its own universal. So so the classical example is the red color. The term for it is rakta, and then the redness in turn is the universal of the property. So property also has a universal which resides in it, and it's called raktata, the redness of the red. So there is this chain of sort of things that come kind of one after the other. So there is an object, its properties, and then the universal of the properties, and so on and so forth. So this way, the artha of an object is also something of a complex nature, and our senses to have a proper knowledge of them, and most of these properties of the object are directly available to us on Nyaya account, are directly available to us within our perceptual field. Accordingly, our field of perception is seen as something very complex by Nyaya philosophers, and accordingly there is a certain complexity that is involved in the perception of each one of these different possible objects of perception. So the object itself, its property, the universal of the property, and a whole array of that. Now this brings us to the second condition that is laid out as far as the perception is concerned in Nyaya Sutras, which is sannikarsha utpannam, sannikarsha, the concourse between the indriya and the artha. So now, before we go into a discussion of that, we sort of must read sort of a few passages on sort of regarding sannikarsha. So the actual process of sannikarsa happens at two levels. That is, on the one hand, our senses are in touch with the object, and then manas, senses come into contact with manas, and manas with our soul. So the actual process is usually described as follows: actual process of concourse between the object and the senses. The self comes into contact with the manas with the senses, and the senses with the object. When, if certain external conditions like the presence of sufficient light are satisfied, perception takes place. It is obvious that the description applies only to cases involving voluntary attention, and the process is reversed when, for instance, a man waking from sleep perceives the things about him casually. So here, there is another thing that we sort of must understand. The actual the manas, which is the internal sense organ, collects the sense data from the fine sense organs and delivers it to the self or Atman. And this is, and depending on where the manas, which sense organ is manas engaged with, depending on that, the sense data is actually, becomes accessible, some kind of a connection with, with that part of the object, becomes accessible to our for our perceptual knowledge. So say, for example, we can try and understand it like this. At any given instance, there could be a whole lot of sense data that may be coming to us, but we are very selective about what we are allowing ourselves to know. So say, for example, we may be sort of in a deep thought about something, while sort of walking down the road. So there could be several things that which our eyes are seeing. So there could be sort of several images that could be there could be several objects, images of which could be falling upon the retina actually. But we are not seeing them, so because our manas, which collects the sense data, is not engaging with them, because it's focused elsewhere. It may be focused, say, for example, with something that we are going through. So say, for example, if somebody is in pain, then we forget about the noises that we might be hearing at that time. We forget about what we may be seeing around us at that time, and so on and so forth. Why? Because our manas is engaged with internal objects of perception, namely pain, or similarly pleasure. If we are too happy about something, we forget what are the other things around us. So this is necessary. Manas is supposed to be atomic, very subtle in nature. Sukshma is the word for that, and therefore it engages with only one of the sense organs at one time. And this is why we have our limitations. So there could be a lot of sense data coming to us all the time, but it depends on our manas whether it wants to collect the sense data from them or not. So this is how the actual sort of concourse happens at two levels. The word Indriya here denotes not only the five organs, as we saw earlier, as elsewhere in Indian philosophy, but also the manas. The last is the means of experiencing pain, pleasure, hunger, etc. Thus, the manas is not only an aid in acquisition of knowledge through the other senses, it is also a direct means of securing for the self the knowledge of certain internal states. The senses accepting the manas, which is both simple and ultimate, are explained here as derived from single elements. Bhautika, the sense of sight from fire atoms, the sense of taste from water atoms, the sense of touch from air atoms, and the sense of smell from earth atoms. The sense of hearing is Akasha itself, as pointed out earlier, but as delimited by the corresponding physical organ, that is the ear. So the principle underlying the explanation is that like only can affect like, since without kinship between sense and its objects, its distinctive capacity cannot be satisfactorily accounted for. The organ of sight alone, for example, apprehends color, for it alone is made of tejas atoms, whose characteristic quality is color. This is how the doctrine maintains the objective character of the secondary qualities. So, according to most of the realist schools, we must remember here, most of the realist school of Indian philosophy, external senses are material substances. This is something that we must take note of. And this is not something that is limited to Nyaya philosophy alone. For, say, for example, Sankhya philosophy, even mind is supposed to be gross in nature. Even mind is supposed to be a result of different kind of elements that exist in Prakriti, supposed to be in one of the evolutes of Prakriti. So this is a conception that runs across the schools. So according to most of the realist schools of Indian philosophy, external senses are material substances constituted by the physical elements and localized in different end organs, different sense organs, which are end organs. A Nyaya system defines a sense as a supersensible organ of knowledge having its locus in the animal organism. Further from this, also a science cannot itself be sensed or perceived. The existence of the self is not a matter of direct perception for us. It is by means of inference or reasoning that we know their existence. So this is again something. This is also a theme that we find running in some of the Upanishads. So, say for example, Kena Upanishad, it sort of raises several questions regarding not only like through what we see, but it talks about through what does seeing become possible. So the idea here is, though in Kena Upanishads, these questions regarding sense are asked in a very different context, because they want to bring the focus to consciousness, because consciousness the ultimate is the ultimate concern. Is because of consciousness that seeing ultimately becomes possible. But from the point of view of Nyaya philosophy, which is a brand of realism, the sense itself, how do we know the senses themselves? Because they are also objects in turn of they could also be objects of knowledge in turn. They are prameya, they are knowables. So how do we know the senses themselves? So for that they say that we cannot know the senses directly, because they are the very via media, because they are already always outwardly directed. Therefore there is no way we could have a direct perception of them. So they are, as knowables, they become known to us only indirectly through reasoning or through inference. So we know the sense organs themselves through reasoning or inference. The point here is we don't know them directly; we know them indirectly. So this is how the knowledge of senses becomes possible for us. Now, as far as the connection between the sense organs and the object is concerned, there could be two different kinds of perceptions there, and accordingly there could be two different kinds of sense-object contact. So perception could be of two kinds. One is alaukic, and in the alaukic perception are included jnana lakshana sannikarsha, also samanya lakshana sannikarsha, and yogaj kind of perception. And the laukic, which is empirical, this worldly kind of perception, there could be 6 different kinds of sense object concourse. The first one is sanyog, the second one is sanyukta samavaya, third one is sanyukta samaveta samavaya, fourth one is samavaya, fifth one is samaveta samavaya, and the last one is visheshanata. So now we must try and understand what are these two different kind of perceptions that are referred to in Indian philosophy. So in Indian philosophy, what alokik kind of perception does not, as a matter of fact, require a direct perception of something. It actually, as a matter of fact, it doesn't involve the mediacy of the sense organs. As a matter of fact, as I sort of cited out in one of our previous lectures, Navya Nyaya philosophy, starting from Gangesha, is more keen to define perception in terms of mediacy and immediacy. So they think of perception as something that comes along with the quality of immediacy. So any immediate knowledge, for them, would come into the domain of perception, and this is the most definitive of perceptual cognition. So in alokik kind of perception, this mediacy of the sense organ is not sort of important, is not primary, and can be therefore overlooked. So, what are the different kinds of alokik perception? Meaning, sort of a trans-empirical kind of perception. The first one is jnana lakshana sannikarsha. What does it mean? It means, through this kind of trans-empirical perception, Nyayikas, want to take into consideration certain cases of, knowledge, where we seem to know something without actually involving. We seem to perceive something without, as a matter of fact, involving our corresponding sense organ. So, the classical example that is offered in this regard in Nyaya text is that of seeing a flower. So, when we say, for example, see a rose before us, and suppose we are talking with somebody, we might say, "Oh, what a fragrant rose." Now, what happens is that we may be standing at some distance from there. So we could say, well, look at those fragrant roses out there. So the point here is that even though we don't know, we are not directly engaging with the smell of the rose at that time. Rather, we are engaging only with the sight of that particular object, namely rose. We still have this tendency to say that this is a fragrant rose, and that happens because when our sense object comes into contact with one particular property, at times the object that it creates in mind is much more is in a certain way in excess of that. So another case would be the more modern example would be, we all know that what is available to us, what is phenomenologically given to us in our phenomenal experience, in the picture of the world that we have that forms on our retina is only two-dimensional picture. We at any given point, world is given to us as through a two-dimensional image of it that we form inside our eyes. But we always engage with the world not as if it were two-dimensional. We always engage with it as if it were three-dimensional. As a matter of fact, even when we form a judgment, somewhere we know a priori in a certain way, that the object that I'm seeing, even if only two dimensions of it are sort of available to me, we are always aware that there is the other side of it as well. We don't do the same thing, say for example when we are watching a film. We don't we are not prompted to sort of ride in a car that is projected onto the screen in a theater. Because there we know that it's just two-dimensional, but for in all other ordinary cases, even though the image that we have before us is two-dimensional, a third dimension is created in our mind, even though we are not seeing it. So at times the perceptual content that we form inside our mind is in excess of what is phenomenologically given to us. And this kind of construction that our mind plays, constructionist role, so to speak, that our mind plays is defined in terms of a separate kind of trans-empirical concourse connection between the sense organ and the object, and it's defined as Jnana Lakshana Sannikarsha. So it's a special type, it's an extrasensory trans-empirical kind of sense organ concourse defined as Jnana Lakshana Sannikarsha. As opposed to that, there is another kind of alaukic pratyaksha that is delineated in Nyaya philosophy. It is called Samanya Lakshana Sannikarsha, and so it again points towards something that is not directly given to us, but something that we nevertheless understand from a given instance of perception. So what does Samanya Lakshana refer to? According to Nyayikas, when we look at an object and then our senses come in contact with also the generic property that that object has, and when our senses come into contact with the generic property that that particular object has, then somehow we come in contact, we become aware of all the objects in the world that would be there in future, that were there in past, and that exist right now, but are not given to us in the field of our senses. We become aware of all of them in one go. How does it happen? So say, for example, when we have a table before us, then not only do I see a table, but I see the generic, the general nature of that table, namely tableness, the samanya in it, which inheres in it. And when my sense organs come into contact with tableness, since tableness is something that is common to all the tables in the world, in the past and future, and existing right now but are not there before me, since tableness is something common to all of them, therefore the moment my senses are in touch with tableness of the present table, I am brought in touch with all the tables, all the possible tables simultaneously, and this happens at a trans-empirical level. And this comes very handy, as a tool when in their theory of error. This, they take resort to it when they try to explain the cases of error. So, friends, we'll talk. We'll talk more about Nyaya Theory of Perception in our coming lectures. That is it for now. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session. Friends, you're requested to write to us at info.cec@nic.in if you have any query or feedback. We are going to meet again very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.